The story of OTOK and how it all began. The acronym, which seemed a little awkward at first, has become the namesake of this juvenile justice initiative. When we created the title, Our Town, Our Kids, we didn't think about acronyms. Rather, we just wanted a way to convey the community connection to youth in a positive, memorable way. And stick it did. Many people are now familiar with the name, the moniker, and the little face that marks its character. I've grown to love its little smile. So we might rightfully say that OTOK has become a successful stamp, a token of triumph, a feat of fulfillment. Okay, I think I should probably stop there. But the truth is, only the test of time will mark OTOK's ultimate achievement. The test of its success as an idea is not whether people will remember the happy face, but whether we achieve its mission and stay true to its values and its vision. The next move is yours, and mine, and ours together. That is why we are here today. So when it began, we turned to the real experts, those in the field. We traveled across the state. We asked Peggy and Katrina and Robert and Callie, and many of you out there in western Kansas. We also knocked on doors far and wide, including right here in our own backyard. Shelly Williams, Community Corrections Director of the 21st Judicial District, is one of those veterans who drove home the importance of data at the local level, and in a way we'll never forget. Watch for a very unusual data set, one about a full moon. Shelly has been instrumental in teaching us how to challenge common myths through data. Shelly?
I learned the importance, maybe not the true value, of data very early on in my career. Maybe it was living in a university town, or maybe it was because I paid so much attention to statistics for the social sciences or methods class in college. Living in Manhattan, Kansas, and having Kansas State University just down the street, we have never been without talented interns every single semester. As such, in the mid-90s, we partnered with the K-State Family Center, the center where marriage and family therapy graduate students get practicum hours. A graduate level student would provide individual therapy to both our adult and juvenile clients, and we pay for therapy for our clients at a reduced cost through a contract. So at some point along the way, a student intern introduced me to SPSS, a statistical tracking database that is super expensive, unless of course you have a student intern buy it for you. But now that I'm the director, I would never think of arranging such a purchase. I learned enough about SPSS to be dangerous, which is slightly more user-friendly than Excel. Let me back up just a minute. My first experience with juvenile justice reform came along between 1996 and 1998. And as the facilitator of the local community planning process, I was responsible for a wealth of information and data. And now enters future KSU professor Don Kurtz and eventually future KSU professor Travis Linneman, who are probably actually the ones who introduced me to SPSS and might have even purchased it for the agency at the student intern price. I'm just saying. It was only sometime after this that state and federal grants were becoming available to local juvenile justice practitioners. And lo and behold, they required data and data tracking. Someone said on the call last week that the value of data-driven decisions is the architecture of sustainability. And I think I saw that as the title on one of today's subheadings. This really hit home with me because in order to sustain funding for programs, you have to have data. I so much so believed in data that I volunteered to be a pilot site for disproportionate minority contact, and it was a data collection research project in 2006. I hired a former employee who was working on his master's to conduct the project. Another shout out to sociology professor Travis Linneman, who was the actual data collection person. So what was that data used for? Where did it go? Who did it benefit? Turns out with changes in state leadership comes the ebb and flow of priorities. DMC as a priority faded into the distance. Fast forward 12 years later, and my local district has DMC issues. Had the state prioritized the ongoing collection of DMC data, I would like to think that we would have made data-informed decisions along the way and not have DMC issues today. Here are a couple of screenshots of our juvenile intake and assessment services data collection spreadsheets from roughly 2010 until 2018. As you can see, we collected and ran the data several different ways. Depending on which grant we were applying for, some of them required it by offense, some of them required it by gender. It just depended on who was asking for the information. And then you can see some of them are titled research, for research. And those sometimes we would often share with universities so that they could also do any kind of research that they wanted to without the names of the offenders within the Excel spreadsheets. One example is when the Big Red One returned to Kansas, and there was rumor that some federal military dollars might become available for programs. So I needed to know how many military dependent children and youth we were processing through juvenile intake and assessment. So here's a screenshot of yet another Excel spreadsheet that we had to create, and we started tracking military dependent. And then for those of you who may be familiar, we are building NBAF in Manhattan, Kansas, and that too is a federal facility and one that might come with some federal dollars, but also with that comes a larger population and possibly some child need of care as well as juvenile offender issues and needs. And so we have just either added 2 Excel spreadsheets or modified, adapted, started new ones, but most of this data we have to hand collect, hand tabulate, and actually take it from one database and put it into Excel spreadsheet. This next screen is a rather unique one in that I wanted to know if full moon activity actually impacted the number of intake and assessments that we conducted during full moons. Whenever we would have advisory board meetings, there were always comments being made that, oh, there was a full moon last week, or, oh, there's gonna be a full moon next week, and so you're going to be so much more busy. So I thought it was important to take a look at that. I wanted to see how that impacted staffing patterns and if I needed to beef up my staff or make any adjustments. And so this portion of this database actually shows you the days of the week that we had more intakes than other days of the week. And so with this, if you will click on FY18 or scroll up on this particular slide, you can see the actual full moon database. And it has moons on it. And again, this was a student intern project at the time. So it not only gave us a snapshot of whether or not there was an impact and a connection with the full moon and the number of intakes that we were processing, but it also, it was kind of an offshoot of it, but we got to see which day of the week was more prevalent for juvenile intake and assessment. So you're probably asking why I just didn't use the state databases to track the necessary data. I'm still asking that question 26 years later. Not why am I not using it, but why can't I use it for the information that I need to track? That funding sources require, that best practice calls for, that true outcome-based programming necessitates, because not everything is in one database. Since we operate adult and juvenile services, we are required to use the TOADS database, JGIMES, KDAI, IIP, and KZIMS. In addition, I'm supposed to be using a Maisie's 2 database that I've never been able to use because our county information systems department is leaps and bounds ahead of the state, and it wouldn't run the Maisie 2 database. And 2 of these databases were just developed and implemented in the last few months. Rumor has it that KDOC is getting ready to launch a new Microsoft database to go live next July. So in addition to the state required databases, we have access to view-only local law enforcement databases, KCGIS for background checks, and we used to have access to OJA's full court system. In preparing for this talk, I just realized that the data systems in corrections in Kansas are more fragmented than the extremely fragmented juvenile and criminal justice systems in Kansas. Now think about that one. Yes, our data systems are fragmented, but so is our system as a whole. So I only hope now that I work long enough to see a state database that can not only track important information, but that I can actually query from the databases the information that I need. I want to be able to know that I'm measuring what I need to be measuring, and I also want to know that I've been interpreting the data correctly. And one last example I want to share with you is Johnson County Department of Corrections is actually loaning me their data person who is going to take a massive Excel database that I am putting together from TOAD's adult corrections database and various other databases within the state. And they're going to use their Tableau system to query and display the data for the Kansas legislature and the Kansas Criminal Justice Reform Commission. Now, granted, full moon data tracking is extreme, but nonetheless, it is something that we were interested in and we wanted to evaluate staffing patterns. So in summary, I think I'm just most sad that the state has not been able to move forward with a comprehensive, shareable data system that we could all utilize and benefit from. Thank you.